Hello and welcome to the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Our guest today is Arlene Joell, and she's the CEO and Executive Director of CAFY. CAFY stands for Community Advocates for Family and Youth. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us exactly, what does CAFY do? You help with victims' rights. Tell us some of the things that you guys do.
Well, CAFY is a victim services organization in Prince George's County, and we're 13 years old. And one of the things we represent is we have an agreement with Prince George's Police Department and the City of Laurel act as their victim services unit. And so what that means for the community is that we are proactively reaching out to someone who's been impacted by crime to talk about what their rights are as a victim, but also to offer service to them. And so the services can be anywhere from, okay, what's going to happen next, after the police leave, to counseling, to financial assistance, to temporary relocation, all the way up to support through the court system.
You said you've had this organization for 13 years. Tell us how you've seen things change in the county over the last 13 years when it comes to crime victims and how the county deals with that.
Well, a couple of things. Certainly crime's going down, so that's a good thing. But people are increasingly reporting. And I think it's because they see that these agencies and organizations and the police department are really trying to respond to provide services, to crime victims, and to make sure that it's not a, long-term, issue for people. And I think that's one thing that we've seen. Even as it relates to domestic violence, the county police kind of restructured so that they do have a domestic violence unit. So anytime something like family violence, intimate partner violence occurs, it's treated and addressed almost like a felony. A detective takes over and really investigates that, identifies who the aggressor is, and really works to get people out of harm's way.
And it sounds like they're taking this more seriously.
Very seriously. And I think if, Prince George's County is unique because we have not only the county police, but 26 municipalities. And I think if you talk to any of those police chiefs, they're all taking domestic violence and intimate partner violence very seriously.
You're the CEO and executive director of the organization, also the founder.
Yes.
What made you decide to develop this organization?
I know I always say my gift is servanthood, so I think that's probably the biggest thing. But I've always volunteered in terms of working with women who were involved in domestic violence, children with child abuse, and so I had the opportunity to retire early and started volunteering, working with sexual assault victims, and did that for a couple of years and just kind of felt that there was still something else needed, and so my passion was initially preparing children to testify in court. And so that was the program that I really started CAFY with. That was the foundation. After the law changed and children had to face their accuser, it's important that children understand, okay, what the process is. And so that was kind of the catalyst for the organization. And then a couple of years later, we got the opportunity to do some victim services support for the police department, and then it kind of grew from there.
So it's mandatory for children to testify in court against their accuser.
Well, the law states that the offender has the right to face their accuser, and so and I can't remember the exact case. I want to say Connor, but I'm not sure. But there was a case that said even in situations where a child accuses someone of a crime, that offender still has the right to face that child. And so when that happened, then children had to take the witness stand. So it was no longer the officer testifying on behalf of what the child told them or the social worker or even the parent. The child actually has to tell their own story.
How do you prepare a child, and what are the ages that we're dealing with here? From what age to what?
Well, children are different, you know, because a 4-year-old can be very articulate and understand the difference between a truth and a lie. And so that's kind of like the test point, if you will, in terms of if they can understand that difference, then they can begin to understand, okay, what's this big room going to be all about? It's not our job to prep them to tell their story, but what I believe is that if you can prepare them for the environment, the personnel, the expectation, it's almost like preparing for a test. Then, you know, when they walk into the courtroom, they feel, okay, I've done this before.
And so we're talking about anywhere from 4 years old to 18?
4 years old. And we also do it for adults, but 4 to 18 for children.
And of course, preparing a 4-year-old is very different than preparing a 9-year-old.
Correct.
So how do you work with that?
Well, we have different mock trials, if you will, because, you know, from a romper room standpoint, you can kind of talk to a 4 or 5-year-old about, you know, truth and a lie, what do you think is going to happen in here? And then, you know, 6 to 13, you can talk about, you know, someone, we have like a goldfish trial, you know, someone let your goldfish die. And then over and above that, you can actually talk about a specific event. You know, and that event could be, you know, somebody's book bag getting stolen. Because the thought is that, what's it going to feel like when I'm up on that witness stand? You know, where am I going to look? Where's my mom going to be? You know, that kind of thing. And that's the opportunity we really want to give children, in addition to them knowing that, you know, a judge is a person just like you, just like your mom, and so is a state's attorney.
How do you know that you've successfully prepared this child?
Well, we gauge it a couple of ways. Depending on the age of a child, they can do, you know, survey, because they know kind of what they knew when they came in and what they're walking away with. But the other thing is, too, going to following that child in the trial process to see, did the child get the opportunity to testify? And if they did, how did they work out? You know, what did did the non-offending parents say? You know, how's the child reacting? What did they talk about after leaving the session?
You prepare adults as well. What usual situation are we talking about? You prepare adults who are dealing with domestic violence when it comes to court, and are people preparing themselves and not preparing themselves properly, so you have to kind of come in and help?
I think the one thing with adults is that, I think one thing that we stress is that this is your one opportunity to tell your story. And so you can't be distracted by, you know, the techniques that are used by the different, the two sides of the prosecuting and defense attorney, because if you do, you miss the opportunity. So that's our biggest, you know, our biggest discussion with adults. We do take them through, you know, mock trials as well, so that, you know, they feel comfortable. You could have a soft-spoken, you know, adult.
Well, do you find that these adults are representing themselves in court?
No. For the most part, the adults that come to our court education are adults that have to testify in a case. So not the adult that, you know, goes to court and self-represents.
Okay, okay. And so what are the things that you need to go over and that they need to be aware of?
Well, 3 things that we always talk about. One is time, distance, and multiple questions. Because as adults, we kind of tend to feel like, oh, I know that's 100 feet. And if you say the wrong thing, it can quickly get turned into, oh, you know, a lie, you know, maybe trying to misguide the truth. And so we talk a lot about that.
Tell us what other things your organization does. For example, you have several youth programs where you deal with teens and teen violence. Mm-hmm. And we've seen, I'm sure you read the newspaper, we've seen that it's something, I don't know if more of it happens now and it's getting more broadcast time, or whether, I don't know what the situation is, but we are seeing much more of that now than ever before.
Right. Well, what we try to do is educate teens on healthy relationships. And that can be intimate partner relationships, but it could also be a healthy relationship with a friend. We know that, violence breeds violence, and so your norm is your norm, but it's helping children or youth understand how to deal with conflict.
And especially we've got so many bullying situations going on. What are you guys seeing as far as that goes?
Well, bullying is not only an issue in Prince George's County, but that's kind of a national issue because it is becoming, detrimental to children. I mean, children are committing suicide because of, social bullying and not having that private space and that boundary that you can protect anymore because anyone can put anything about you on Facebook. And so, educating even youth on, what's appropriate to be on Facebook and what's not, and really helping them understand that that Facebook will follow you when you're 22, and it might not be the same message that you want out there at that point.
And it's so funny, in our day we didn't have that.
Right.
We didn't have to worry about what someone was going to put on Facebook.
Right.
So these kids now face so many more challenges than what we faced.
Right.
Go ahead.
And I was going to say, and that's one of the reasons why too we do a lot of education on parents and teens seeking counseling and mental health services, because people need to understand that that is a traumatic experience, and you can develop and learn tools through counseling in terms of how to manage that, how to manage anger, how to manage, an event that's imposed on your, personal self. All of those things can be learned through counseling.
So you refer people to different counselors, or do you have that available at your facility?
We do have a counseling center at our facility, and all of our clinicians are experienced in trauma. And so from our perspective, trauma is different than going to a counselor where they're talking about lifelong issues. Because trauma is something that if it's dealt with immediately and you can develop the understanding in terms of how this is currently affecting my life, that you can deal with, maybe 36, maybe 48, maybe a year, it's time.
So when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about crime for the most part?
Correct.
And what do you see, what type of trauma issues are we dealing with when someone comes in and they've been a victim?
Well, victims, deal with post-traumatic stress disorders, just as if, vets deal with it coming from the war, because your sense of being has been changed. Whether you've lost your, son to a homicide, or you were at the Safeway and you got carjacked, your perspective of life changes, and so how do you manage that from this point on? And so it's our belief that if you can actually help somebody understand how to get to that new normal, and that's a terrible thing, but for lack of a better phrase, that new normal space, then they're more likely to be able to, regain control, and help them understand, okay, how am I going to feel safe again? What's my new world going to look like? Because that's what's really important, people being restored from the impact of being a crime victim.
And when a crime is committed and you are a victim of a crime, it doesn't just affect you, it affects your family. So if you're a teen who's been violated, not only do you have to deal with this, your parents are dealing with it as well. Do you offer coping skills for the parents as well?
Yes, we do. I mean, we offer family counseling as well as couples, that kind of thing, because you're absolutely right. Everybody's impacted when something like that happens. And even, studies show that at least 25 people are impacted, because if something happens to me, what about the people I go to school with, the people that I work with, my immediate family? If I have a boyfriend or a husband, what about their family? And so it's easy to get to that 25 people are impacted by one crime.
And so how do you deal with that?
So what our process is in terms of, when we reach out to survivors of crime, we have the conversation. Is there anyone else that we should be reaching out to who's supporting you or who knows about this particular situation that may need support and services. And so we allowed the survivor to identify, who in their, sphere of support would need support services.
Let's go back to talking a little bit more about the whole domestic violence issue and how you service people who are victims of domestic violence. Is it always a matter of them needing housing, and do you provide some sort of temporary housing? How does that work?
Well, it's not always just housing, because some people stay where they are, but they need just a safety plan to try to, manage where they are. Everyone doesn't leave, and that's just the reality of it. But you still want the person that may remain in that volatile situation to understand the impact that it might have on that it does have on the children, if there's children in the home, and then if one night you are ready to escape, what that escape is going to look like. So even if the person says, okay, I can't go anywhere, you want them to be prepared. So we do that, safety planning. And then for the person that that does leave, then we do help with relocation. And that could be a couple of ways. One could be is the person going to the shelter and helping them, get prepared to do that. The other thing is, maybe I leave tonight, but I'm going to end up staying with my sister, and so I have a transition period. So we do offer emergency housing, in hotels where we have relationships and agreements with. The other thing is even financial planning, because what if I've never had to pay rent? What if I'm not responsible for the bills? Then I don't even understand that concept. And so we do have financial planning to help them kind of, okay, what is this going to look like moving forward?
And of course, that something like that, if you've never dealt with the finances before, that can be so frightening that it may force you to stay in a situation that you know is absolutely wrong for you.
You're right.
How far ahead should that plan be? You know what I mean? When you're planning to, or you have people calling you saying, I'm thinking about leaving, but I don't know what to do.
I think some people do plan to leave, and that's a good situation, right? But most of our situation there's been an incident, and so now what are you going to do? And I mean, it's no new statistic, but they say that it takes at least 7 incidents for a person to say, okay, I'm leaving. But even prior to that, I think it was the University of California, they did a study where it said it takes 8 conversations. So I'm going to talk to you 8 times about what's going on in my house before I even get to the point like, oh, I might need to do something about it. And so think about it. That's close to 16 times where I'm going to be abused and maybe not take action. And so if you just can validate that, yeah, this is happening, but how can we help you? And even if that step is just, well, let me see what a safety plan looks like, that's a step forward.
You know, I wish more families understood that, that just because your mom or your sisters or your aunts feel like it's time for you to leave and they know what the situation is and nobody understands why you stay, or nobody understands why you keep talking about it but you won't do anything about it. I wish there was more of an understanding that it takes time for these women to process what's going on and what they need to do about it.
You're so right. You're so right. You know, and we try to validate our survivors just by saying, you know, it makes sense because this is someone that you love, that you trusted. This is someone that, you know, takes care of you and your children. You know, so first you have to get past that, right? And then say, okay, and now what's my life going to look like outside of, you know, what I'm used to?
What success have you seen over these past 13 years that you can tell us about?
Well, I know last year we placed 11 survivors, you know, in permanent housing, and that equated to 26 children. So getting not only the survivor, but the children out of harm's way. We clocked over 3,600 hours of therapy, helping people regain control after, crimes impacted their lives. And even our engagement rate, and that's just people who actually take advantage of the services. We probably served over 700 survivors of crime.
So people are becoming more open to the idea of using services like yours.
Right, and I think people are trusting of community-based organizations. And so I think that's one of the advantages as well that we have. We say, okay, we're there whenever you're ready. And so while something may happen tonight and I call you, you may not be ready to do anything. But 6 months down the road, you might say, oh, let me find that card, let me find that information, because now you're ready.
So how will people, or we'll give your information at the end of the show so people can know how to contact you. But what would you say to someone who's watching the show right now and they're thinking about it, but they're not quite sure? What would you say to them to let them know if you make this move, it can be okay?
Well, I think it's about having the conversation and knowing that you're not going to be forced to make the move, but to reach out to get the information first and then make the decision.
And how long would you say it takes? Because if it takes 8 conversations, kind of 16,
right.
It sounds like it takes probably, that sounds to me like years.
It could be years because think about it. If my norm is violence in the home, I saw it in my upbringing, now it's happening to me. I have a daughter maybe experiencing that same kind of conflict and relationship, then that's my norm. And so first of all, it's about changing your view on relationships, right? And that's why mental health is so important, because how I view myself is how I'm going to decide to live. And so while I may get tired of the abuse, I may not see the alternative. My dream doesn't go that far.
Have you seen success as far as getting the children the counseling they need?
Yes, I do think that there's certainly an increase in parents understanding that, whether it's domestic violence, child abuse, witnessing violent crimes, that there's a significant impact that has on children. And so we are seeing more parents bringing their children for therapy.
Have you seen it work, though?
I believe therapy works. If you're consistent, because there's all kinds of modalities that you can use, with children. Because the one technique we use in our counseling center is sand therapy, and it allows children.
Sand therapy. What is what is sand therapy?
Well, it actually allows children to create, their life or a picture of in the sand with all different types of, characters and items. But it also allows them to tell that story. So what does the sand say about you? And so a child that can't even talk about maybe being abused sexually or physically, they could develop a scene in the sand that shows, maybe a father upside down in the sand, or a broken house, or something like that. And all of that depicts something. And that's where you can kind of start the conversation with children.
That is so interesting. Well, in wrapping up our program, let's end it on a positive note. Do you all have anything that's going on that you would like to mention? Anything that's going on right now? Any current programs?
Well, I mentioned about our court education, because that is every month at the Upper Marlboro Courthouse. But the other thing, we're starting a campaign in terms of self-representation elimination. And what we're encouraging is for people who are involved in domestic violence to seek legal services, because there are pro bono legal services. We have them, and there's other agencies that offer that, so that they can be represented not only for the protective order to get them out of harm's way, but then they can start thinking about, what about child custody? What about child visitation? What about all those things that kind of puts me back in harm's way that can be modified and corrected through a legal proceeding?
So what's happening now? People aren't getting that legal representation?
People have a tendency to self-represent themselves, and they're not always successful. Because it would just, I'm not an attorney, but if I go to present my case before, a judge about child custody, child modification, and, my abuser, more often than not, they have attorneys, it kind of puts me at a disadvantage.
And so what's happening, the case doesn't quite go?
Maybe I don't get full custody. Maybe I still have to share custody, which still poses a problem for me because that puts me in harm's way.
And what do you do during these sessions?
Well, they actually meet with an attorney to prepare the paperwork for them to present, or the attorney actually goes with them to present the case to the judge.
Very good, very good. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so
having
much.
you here today, and I just wish you the best of luck with the program. And it seems like you've had pretty good luck because you've been in business for 13 years, and sometimes it's not luck, sometimes it's Jesus.
That's right.
Thank you for joining us. We've been talking to Arlene Joell. She's the CEO and Executive Director of CAFY, Community Advocates for Family and Youth. Very good. Thanks for watching the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Have a great day.